Hello to those of you who are joining us. Welcome to our latest webinar. Trying to think, what day is it? What month is it? We're in April now, aren't we? Yes. See a few people just joining. We'll give it a couple of minutes before we get started to give people a chance to join. So I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are in the world. It's always nice to hear what part of the world you're dialing in from. So if you want to pop in the chat where you're dialing in from, um, we'll see how far the net is cast this afternoon, Katie. See if we're more of a Eurocentric group this afternoon, or if we're a worldwide group. You never know. You never know which way it's going to go, do you?
So there's a few familiar names. There's no faces. I see no faces. A few familiar names on there. So at the moment, my money's on the fact we're pretty UK centric today.
Mhm. Dublin, London. Oh, yes, pretty London centric so far.
Mhm.
I'm dialing in from sunny Hastings today, which is rather lovely. Going to be very stereotypically British and talk about the weather. It's absolutely beautiful down here, which is
It's good to talk about the weather when it's nice like this. We're not used to it being like this. It
makes all the difference, right?
really does. Oh, lots of familiar names today. Lovely to see some of these people joining.
Yeah, definitely. Well, although we can't see them.
See that they're there.
Share this. Oh, hi, Christina. Shared this story many times about why we have to lock down the settings these days. We had a bit of a rogue attendant, didn't we? Probably about a year or 2 years ago, Katie. I wasn't actually on that webinar, but had
Yeah, it probably was closer to 2 years though, although
a
it
dodgy
my brain's
attendant
like it was
who was
yesterday.
sharing some very inappropriate X-rated stuff, which Katie's still got PTSD from it. I
I
can see
have.
it just like.
I really have.
I was like, oh, people understand and, they'll see the funny side. But I think that's probably, like I said, because I wasn't actually on the call. I think I'd have felt quite differently if I was on the call. So that is why we have to have no faces, which is a real shame because I did always used to really like seeing people's faces because it's lovely to see faces. But we are where we are. We will find workarounds at some point. We'll find a solution at some point, won't we, Katie, where we can.
I was going to say, if it was just faces, then I probably wouldn't need to worry, but it wasn't. So
Yeah,
I can laugh about it now. I can
yeah,
laugh about it
yeah,
now. But
yeah. I can see even talking about it. I can see your whole sort of demeanor and energy change. So let's move it on. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about design sprints today. Um, Before we get started, it'd be good just to get a sense of your familiarity with design sprints in the chat. Like, are you using them already? Is it something that's completely new to you? Are you a complete novice? Or are you a seasoned professional? In which case, let us know. We'd love to learn from you as well. So, love to just get a little bit of a sort of sense of where you're at with using design sprints at work. No judgment. If you're like, I'm completely new, don't even know what one is, that's fine. You're in the right place. Um, and if you're a complete professional, then yeah, we want to hear from you because we'll get you on a webinar in the future and you can come talk to us about what you're doing. So, so Rachel's attended ones. Nick is completely new. Great. Okay.
we've got one of our good friends, Christina, on the call, who has been using design sprints for close to a decade now.
Yeah.
So
Christina is a seasoned professional. I think Christina knows more than we do. So it's something that we love talking about at People Lab because we are all about trying to make things really practical, simple, easy, straightforward for the companies we work with and the companies we speak to about this stuff. And I first came across design sprints many years ago. I was doing some work with Capital One in the UK, the bank. Incredibly inspiring place to work. Actually, I started working back 2010. And when I went in there as a kind of it was more like a freelancer than a consultant, I guess. You treated like an employee straight away, and you get kind of all the same sort of training, learning, etc., investment really, even if you're not a directly employed employee. And very quickly, I got kind of trained up on how to use design thinking, service design in the workplace, in the world of people, HR, and internal comms. And I'd never really kind of heard about it, but not really come across it. And it's one of those things when I got into it, I thought, oh, I've used bits of that in another, in another life or in another sort of scenario. But yeah, that's when I first was exposed to design thinking, and at that time at Capital One in 2010, every wall was filled with like journey maps and post-its, and there was a real kind of culture of innovation and curiosity and learning because of this whole culture of thinking in this very, very different way. And that's when I think I first really was exposed to just the difference this way of thinking can make. And I'm going to walk you through some slides in just a second. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions as I go, and Katie will interrupt me because we really want to make this interactive, even though you can't unmute, unfortunately. We're gonna find a workaround for this, so you're not with Katie. I'm looking at it like nodding, yes, definitely. Um, so yeah, I'm going to talk through some slides, but please feel free to comment and chat as I go through. It's always really good to get a bit of conversation going. You'll get a chance to, a copy of the slides will be emailed out to you after the webinar itself as well. So you get a copy of the slides. So don't worry about making loads of notes. You'll get all of this and you'll get a recording of the webinar as well. So that's all good. Right. So before I do anything else, let me just check I can share my slides. Pretty sure I can. One sec. Um, Did try this before we went live, but you know what it's like with tech. Yes. Okay. Cool. So today's webinar is really about kind of demystifying these tools and these ways of working. And there's kind of two sides to design sprints. There's very much the sort of practical tool side, but it's also a lot more than that. They're really about a kind of a mindset and a way of approaching problem solving. And actually, we've talked about this webinar today as being an EX design sprint, but it doesn't have to be EX employee experience. It could be anything. You can use design sprints for any people challenge. You can just use design sprints outside of work. And there's a brilliant guy that I follow called Design Thinking Dad, who works at a consultancy more on the customer experience side. But he's done some really great kind of talks and like webinars, etc., about how you can use design sprints for things like how to kind of decide what you want to do with your kids at the weekend if that's a problem you have to solve regularly. So you can use this way of design thinking for anything, but we're going to talk today very much about using it within the people side of the business. So although we've called it what is an EX design sprint, it can be anything, right? It's just a way of solving challenges, of problem solving in an innovative and very curious, creative way. So I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting before we get going into what they actually are and why you might want to use them. So I'm going to state the absolute blindingly obvious here and talk about the changing world of work. We talk a lot about employees being now the consumers of the workplace, and that's been dialed up every year since we started using that phrase. It gets dialed up every year, and employees now expect like a kind of consumer grade experience at work. They want authentic connection, they want personalized communication. And I think, it's never been more evident to me the gap between what we can expect in terms of an experience outside of work versus inside of work. Work has got a long way to catch up, not for everybody, of course, but for a lot of companies out there, there's an ever kind of widening gap. And obviously, AI has come along. The last few years, we've seen how AI is completely revolutionizing the workplace and continue to do so. It's reshaping roles, tools, expectations. Like many of you, I kind of read up regularly on the latest thinking, what's happening. It's hard to keep up on it. Everything changes but day in, day out. And it really depends on which kind of guru or expert you listen to in terms of that picture, in terms of the sort of the really apocalyptic doom and gloom scenario of the future versus a very kind of positive idea of what AI could do to the way we work. On the kind of plus side, it might be that suddenly we've got like much shorter working weeks, we've got much more free time. On the very negative side, it's like, well, who's going to have a job left at the end of all this? It's probably somewhere in the middle of those two, I guess, but we'll see. And so AI is completely rewriting the playbook in terms of how we approach work, and our side of the business, the people side of the business, whatever side of the people side you're in. There's no doubt that AI is completely changing things up for you. So lots going on. And I just thought it was useful just to sort of make a nod to a couple of recent reports that have come out that are really well worth a look. And we'll send you links to these as well in the follow-up materials. So the World Economic Forum Jobs Report talks about these in-demand skills really shifting from technical knowledge to human-centered capabilities. And I talk a lot, we do a lot of work in the field of AI, and we work with a lot of clients around how we can work with AI. And there is a point to this because I'll talk about how design thinking really slots in beautifully to this. But we talk a lot about the world, sort of the era of the expert is over. So, years ago, whatever kind of field you're in, like say if you're in internal comms or L&D or reward, you had to know your expertise. You had a kind of technical body of knowledge. AI's come along and it's kind of really, I guess, decreased the demand on that expertise. Of course, you still need to know your stuff because you need to check that AI isn't hallucinating and it's getting it right. But AI can now write, a comms plan or a comms strategy in seconds, an amazing kind of training program or training plan, PowerPoints, etc., and everything in between. So yes, you still need your expertise to be able to look at that and say, is that going to work? Is that going to work for me? But what that does is it frees up our time as people experts to do some of the stuff that I think we'd always kind of dreamed about doing, that we wanted to do for a long time. And then the Microsoft Work Trend Index talks about this idea of this hybrid team, so the human agent hybrid team. So the future work from a Microsoft point of view is how are we going to work with AI? So which bits can we get clear on that AI can do as well or better than the humans? Which bits can it definitely not do? And which bits are we good working together on? So that's kind of where we're going with this. And I'm just going to give a little bit more flavor on this. And then, as I said, this is very relevant to this world of design thinking and design sprints, because this is a really beautiful solution to everything I'm talking about here. So the Davos meet at the beginning of the year, the World Economic Forum annual general meeting. Some really, really interesting stuff coming out of there. And many of you have probably had a look at this already, but just in case you haven't, I just thought I'd summarize what's changing about the workplace and why this matters. And like I said, there is a point to this, so just stick with me. There is a point to this. It does link to everything we're talking about today. So I'm not going to go into this in loads of detail, but again, we'll send you a link to the report itself, and we did a kind of a summary blog on this as well. But a few key points coming out here. So yeah, AI is just redesigning work. It's not just automating tasks. So I think a few years ago, absolutely was all about automation. Now it's kind of really redesigning the way that work happens in an organization. So the roles, the things that we do, the job descriptions, the way the work flows, the way decision making happens, shifting, and we're seeing really interesting case studies coming out. The kind of classic Klarna case study where they got rid of loads of customer service agents and replaced them with AI, then realized it didn't work and then brought them all back in. And then other companies that are taking a very short-term view and going, actually, we don't need the people anymore. We'll use AI. And lots going on in that space. And I think we're still just trying to figure out what this all means. People strategy is the differentiator. Sounds really obvious, but organizations have got access to the same tools, right? We've got access to the same knowledge, the same thinking. What separates those keeping up is how thoughtfully they support learning, confidence, and trust and work design. So the way that you approach this, and I love this quote, observe the herd and do the opposite. The way you really think about the way the world of work is changing, the way AI is shifting everything, the way that you really sort of intentionally think about that is really going to give you a competitive advantage. And again, design thinking as a tool is something that can absolutely help you to do that big time. So just wanted to kind of make that point there, really. Skills are becoming the core infrastructure. So one-off training isn't enough. It's all about continuous learning, adaptability, human judgment. So remember that word or that phrase, human judgment, is essential to day-to-day work. And again, that's really leaning into what is demanded of us when we use tools like design thinking and design sprints in work. It's about using the human side of what we bring to the party. And human skills actually matter more, not less. So this is kind of flies in the face of a lot of writing around AI. So yes, AI can take on a lot of that expertise I mentioned before, but things like your human judgment, creativity, sense making, and ethics, they become absolutely central to value creation. To that point two, the people strategies are the differentiator. You're leaning into that, think about what are the human skills that matter more. It's those some of those things that are listed there. And again, so what does it have to do with design thinking and design sprints? That is exactly what they are all about. So using design thinking and taking a design sprint absolutely requires you to dial up your judgment, your creativity, your sense making, your ethics. So that's why I think these sorts of ways of working will become absolutely in demand and critical as we move into whatever this next era of the people side or work full stop, but the people side of the business looks like. So as I said, there is kind of a reason I'm bringing this up because it's kind of really creates a case for using the skills I'm going to talk about today, the approaches I'm going to talk about today. Katie, feel free to interrupt me if there are any questions coming through.
Only question about the recording and the slides, which we will be sharing with everybody after the session as well.
And you're best placed to answer those anyway. So a couple of the pieces, AI adoption is stalling in some places. There's low confidence, unmet expectations, lack of psychological safety, and there are so many elements to this. And I've written so many blogs about this, all the different kind of, well, not all of them, I wish I had, but many of the different sort of facets and ways of looking at AI and things like psychological safety and where does our kind of responsibility as an employer and that safety piece begin and end when AI comes into play. And we just don't know the answer to that yet. It's something that we need to kind of figure out pretty quickly. And trust, fairness, inclusion are strategic concerns. So responsible AI isn't just about the governance, it's about how people experience change and transparency and decision making. So that links to that sort of point five as well. So, bottom line here is the future of work won't be won by tech alone. It will be shaped by organizations willing to stay curious, human, and intentional about how work really happens, right? The way we do that is leaning into and using the tools and the approaches I'm going to talk to you about today. So that is, design thinking, service design. I mean, I've written a couple of books which use talk about these tools a lot, and I don't get too hung up on the different sort of disciplines, or is it design thinking, or is it agile, or is it service design, or is it product design? And lots of people out there are sort of saying, let's use product design for HR, let's use service design, let's use design thinking. Doesn't really matter. There is a beautiful, messy Venn diagram which kind of has at its core those elements of being curious, being creative, being intentional, being human. That's what all of these approaches have in common. They all differ slightly. And if you're going to be kind of really, really strict about it, you might argue that one's more relevant or right than the other. But I don't buy into that whole kind of semantic debate about that. I don't think it matters. And I beg, borrow, and steal from all of the above, right? So we'll use tools from agile, from design thinking, from product design, from service design, and more. Okay, it doesn't really matter as long as it gets the job done. So I'll explain what I mean by that as I go through the slides. So this is why, hopefully this makes sense in terms of this background, me giving you this sort of strategic background, what's happening, makes sense in terms of creating this case for using the tools and the approaches I'm going to talk about today. And those people that adopt these ways of working, ways of thinking, absolutely will create more value. You'll create competitive advantage. You'll become more in demand because you're thinking very differently to the way that work got done of old. So hopefully I've made the case already for this, but AI is here, right? It can do all this wonderful stuff. It can process, predict, personalize at scale we've never seen before. We've only dreamt about. I think back to like my early days, the idea of being able to personalize just felt like a kind of, a dream really. We would have a best intentions and maybe we kind of like look at use employee personas, for example, to look at kind of how the experience might be for a few different groups. But the idea of personalizing it to the individual could never have done that before. And now it's here, we can do that. Absolutely do that. It's very exciting. But what it can't do yet, it can't empathize, influence, or inspire in the way that us as human beings can. So the future of work absolutely demands emotionally intelligent design. So as AI is kind of taking over a lot of our old expertise, I keep saying that the world, the era of the expert is over, and it's now being about, people first or human first. That's the new era we're in. So as the future of work demands more emotionally intelligent design, really this is where we can start to dial up these tools I'm going to talk about today. So that means working with AI, combining the speed and intelligence of AI, but with our core skills, which are curiosity, creativity, and empathy. So that's what we can really bring to the party, and we get a much better result when we do that. And the wonderful thing for me is that, a lot of the tools and approaches I'm talking about today, now we can use them in a far more productive and economic and efficient way because you've got AI doing a lot of the heavy lifting behind the scenes in a way that we didn't have even like 5 years ago. So that's what has really enabled us to kind of wholesale make use of the tools I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so lots of organizations don't know where to start. So it's been my observation, your view on this, that lots of organizations approach not just even experiences, but the whole people side of the business from like ivory tower. So we are the experts. We know what's best for you. We're going to do some stuff that we think will work, whether that's a reward and recognition approach, whether that's L&D approach, whatever it might be. It's kind of built on assumptions, and there's kind of a more of a one size fits all initiative. That was how things were done until very, very recently. For many organizations, that's still very much how things are done. Um, Other organizations are investing in EX teams and gathering EX insight, but don't really know why they're still not getting results. They're kind of starting to make some changes, but they're still not really getting the results they want. And so many start working on finding solutions before they've got clear on the problem they're trying to solve. And I see this time and time again. And there's a classic kind of, classic sort of being a consultant and going into work with organizations, so often we will work with companies who are like, we've already figured out what the answer is. And do you know what? That might be correct, but so often we kind of encourage them to take a step back and say, let's get really clear on the problem we're trying to solve here, because what you think might be the answer might not be the solution that you need or want after all. So what we found is that most organizations don't have a delivery problem. They're really good at delivering. They have a design problem. And this is where design thinking, service design, product design, etc., user experience design comes in. And this is where it really, really comes into its own. And this is how we close the gap. So we use these tools, these methods, these mindsets, these ways of thinking to understand the real lived experience of the people we are designing for. And this is such a simple, obvious shift, but one that so few organizations really do, is say, well, how can we genuinely design for the end user? How can we genuinely take on that mindset, which is rather than us sort of saying, well, I'm the expert in L&D or reward, and I know what's best, and I'm going to put this solution in place. How can we just kind of let go of that need to be the expert just for a short time and say, well, let's really understand what that lived experience is like for our people and what might work for them, and then test, prototype, and test some solutions before we actually go out full sort of steam ahead with a solution. So that's what we're really talking about here. We talk about this approach, this mindset. So a few kind of key elements that I'm going to pull out as we go through the slides. I want you to just kind of really hold on to. So if you do nothing else, just take this slide away and just do something with this. So at the heart of this whole approach is designing with, not for. So it's just, as I said, letting go of that need to always be the expert and saying, you know what, I kind of got a hunch about what I think might work here, but I'm not going to make the assumption that I know what is best for different people in our organization. I'm not going to assume that I know what works best for people in different parts of the organization. I'm going to go out and speak to them and maybe even get them involved in some of the kind of co-creation here. We're going to focus on moments that matter. And this is hugely interesting because, again, when we run design sprints with clients, it's just wonderful seeing those light bulb moments as, the people in the room who are the kind of the subject matter experts, as we call them, who think that certain parts of that kind of experience or that journey is really critical. And when they hear from real life employees, they realize that thing they were focusing on, they thought was really important, actually, the employees doesn't really matter at all. So I'll give you a very kind of real example there. We do a lot of design sprints around onboarding because very often it's one of the kind of first obvious kind of broken parts of the experience or the journey. We work with a lot of companies who sort of say, well, our onboarding's not working. We're losing people in the first 6 months, or the first 6 months people are not really feeling it, or they're not getting up to kind of full productivity, or something isn't working. And we run a kind of design sprint, and the first part of that design sprint is to gather insight and data and to find out what's really going on. What is that current experience like? Just not make assumptions about that. And when I say find out what's really going on, I don't mean, by sending out a survey. I mean, actually getting in a room, either physical or online, with people who have been through that onboarding fairly recently, and mapping that experience, mapping that journey, and finding out what are the moments that mattered, what part of that experience made a real difference to how you felt about joining this organization. And the subject matter experts have often taken, a lot of time and effort on things like the intranet site, the welcome pack, the toolkits, the merch. Those organisations that do merch, the kind of really cool sort of branded water bottle, whatever it might be. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, that stuff really doesn't matter to the people who are going through it. They say, it really mattered on that first day that I had a conversation with my team, either in person or via Teams or via Zoom, and that my boss reached out to me when I first started. I spent time with real people. So it's really interesting that what you believe as a subject matter expert are the moments that matter can be very different when you actually get in a room with people who've been through that experience. Testing before you scale. This was like a real big light bulb moment for me when I started using these tools all those years ago, was this idea of prototyping and testing. Um, I think until that point, I kind of felt like, I'm the expert here. I have to come up with everything and it has to be beautifully kind of designed and perfect. And then I'll go out and we'll just press the button and we'll just go kind of full steam ahead for everybody. And the idea of actually, running small scale experiments, doing small scale prototype and testing, finding out what really works. Going, well, you know what? Rather than rolling out a new onboarding for like everybody, why don't we just try this with a kind of few cohorts for a few months and see if it works? Do these things that we think are going to make a difference, do they actually make a difference? Once you've got that data, then you can feel much more confident when you roll something out across the whole organization. And this idea of designing experience is not just outputs. So what's the whole experience feel like? Not just the kind of the thing that you want to output on this. So looking at this as a whole, a holistic kind of systems view is really important. And we talk about this mindset of curiosity, empathy, and experimentation. So one of the things I love as well about this way of working is it kind of helps you to get comfortable with getting things wrong. It's almost expected when you take on the mindset of a design thinker, a product designer. You're just really curious about what's working and what's not working. And suddenly you're not sort of trying to justify why you made decision X, Y, or Z to your bosses or the exco. You're sort of saying, well, we went out and we tried this, we got curious about it, and we found this bit worked really well. This bit we need to play around with some more. That's how you would work if you're in marketing, if you're in customer experience, if you're in product design, and that's expected. That's absolutely expected in terms of the way of working in those different disciplines. But when it comes to the people side of the business, we kind of don't have that, I guess, that freedom often to think differently. And working in this way absolutely kind of transforms the mindset into going, it's okay to test things out and to we'd expect to try things out and not to work. None of us are perfect. We don't know what's going to happen in the real world. Absolutely, it's the right thing for us to try some stuff and it not some of it not to work. Empathy is standing in the shoes of the people you're designing for. And that's a really big one as well. Another massive light bulb moment for me was actually, let's get really empathic here. Let's either get some real life employees in a room with us, either, online or in person, or let's find ways to stand in their shoes so we can understand how this experience feels from their point of view. And experimentation, as I said, is really about getting comfortable with trying things out and prototyping and testing. So if you do nothing else, just take this one slide away with you and think about these things when you leave this webinar today. So this is where exercise sprints come in. It's a really practical way to move from insight to action. So that's what I'm going to kind of take us through now. So why bother with a design sprint and not just another project? So what I see often is either so some organizations are really, really good at the analysis. Let's just take the whole industry of employee engagement. A whole industry born out around analyzing stuff, running a survey, taking things that are not working from the survey, trying to action plan, nothing really changing, and almost getting paralyzed by that analysis, and then jumping to solutions really quickly. So, well, the survey has told us that X, Y, and Z broke, so let's just fix that. Just do something about it. Let's put a sticking plaster over that. And then rolling things out of scale and hoping they land. And what a design sprint does is it flips this. So it's really, really if you're involved in design sprints, they're really quick. They don't take months and months and months. If they're really quick, it's like days, not months, to get clarity. Within a few days, you've got clarity on what's not working and why and what needs to change. You get real people involved, so you're not making assumptions. You think about all that massive kind of, you know, huge amount of data you have from running a quantitative survey. And you don't ever really get to the what is this actually really telling us? Because it's quant, right? It's not qual. But when you do a design sprint, you're much more talking to real people. You're hearing it from people's genuine lived experience. Go, well, that's why that's not working. So we know what we need to go for. And you're test before you invest. So you're trying things out. Keep going on about this, but I can't labor this enough. You're trying things out before you invest wholesale in rolling things out. So it's not about doing more, it's about doing the right things faster. And what this enables is it's pretty groundbreaking stuff. So you suddenly you find that you have much faster progress. So you move from insight to action in days, not months. You get, and also as part of that, which I haven't actually put on here, I should have put on here, is you've got evidence base really quickly. The wonderful thing about this whole process is when you're having to defend it amongst, whoever it is you have to get sign off from, you're not talking about the world according to like Emma Bridger or Katie Austin. This is like we've just facilitated some great insight developments with people who are living this day in, day out. And this is what they've told us. It's just really hard to argue with that, almost impossible to argue with that. It's not the world according to me. It's like, well, I've just playing back what I've heard from our real life employees. And that then leads to better decisions. So you're solving the right problem early on and less wasted investment. I keep talking about that and stronger adoption because where we find this works really well is if we bring in the right people to different parts of the design sprint. You don't need everyone to be involved in every part of it, but bring in the right people at different parts of the design sprint will absolutely result in stronger adoption because you're building it with people. You're not assuming what's going to work for them. So this is kind of, I suppose, this is where it all comes together. In case you've got any questions or any pointers or anything I need to pick up so far.
No, no questions so far, but it's a good reminder for anyone that does have any questions, pop them in the chat and we can come to them at any point.
Okay. So this is really the framework. This is like how it all works, how it all happens. So, and I think to be fair, steps one and steps five, you'd probably be pretty familiar with. So the preparation bit is kind of like, all the stuff you do for any big project or any piece of work, you'd lay the groundwork, what are you trying to do here? Who do you need to speak to? All that kind of just good preparation stuff. It's steps two, three, and four is where the magic happens, where we've kind of taken, borrowed, and stolen from service design, design thinking, agile, product design, user experience design, etc. So this is where things start to feel quite different. So in my experience, so many years ago when I was in-house, so 10 years in-house in the world of engagement, HR, internal comms, and someone comes to me with a problem, and I go, yeah, no problem. And I do that number one bit, and then I would jump straight to number four. Go, right, yeah, thought about it, got some objectives. Here's what I think we need to do. Here's my solution. They go, yeah, sounds good, Emma. Go off and do it. Great. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't work. So what we have to do, and we kind of take this very different approach, is I always talk about sitting on your hands. So just despite that desire to jump straight to solution, you say, no, we're going to take some time to really scope out the problem and to really define what it is we're going to be working on and why. So this is kind of where you get really big into the insights. So in this sort of step two here, we typically use things like a journey map. Now you might have heard of a journey map, you might not. Really, really simple tool. You just absolutely, map out the current lived experience. So say you're looking at onboarding, you map the classic onboarding journey with the people in the room who've been through it. You go, right, tell us about all the different parts of that journey, the good, the mediocre, and the not so great. And they kind of get some post-its maybe online with a Miro board or maybe in a room, and they go, well, this bit was quite good. When you first told me got the job, that was pretty cool. I had some really nice phone call, blah, blah, blah. After that, things went really quiet and never heard anything. And then day one, suddenly I got like a load of stuff through before I started on day one, and it was a bit overwhelming. I had to read through this 60-page, employee handbook that felt like it had been written about 30 years ago. Didn't really feel like it was written for me, and it kind of didn't really feel like it was very you. It sort of didn't really live the values you talked to me about, etc., etc. So they'll talk you through that, and you'll map that journey. And within that, you'll look at the moments that matter. See which part of that experience that made a difference to how you felt about the whole onboarding experience, which either from a good perspective or from a bad perspective. And it might be that something, was a kind of mediocre part of the experience, but should have been a really good part of the experience. So again, you can't make assumptions. It's not necessarily the stuff that's really broken that you need to fix. You need to focus on what are the moments that matter. So that kind of step two there is really all about taking time to really define the destination and diagnose the problem you're trying to solve. And again, it's often the case that in that section there that we'll start off thinking that we are working on problem A. And as we get deep into it, we realize that's not the problem at all. There's something completely different going on here. I'll think of some examples in a minute, but and it's really illuminating when you go through that. You think, well, what we thought we were trying to do was fix this thing, but actually, as we've gone through it, we've realized that something's completely different is coming out here. And then that section three, that is all about standing in the shoes that people were designing for. It's about taking a people first approach. That's where we use tools like an empathy map, where we look at, what are people seeing and hearing? What are their pains and gains? How can we really get close to our end user? Think like a product designer or a service designer, and really understand how things are for them. And again, that just gives us more insight to get really, really clear on the problem we're trying to solve. And then and only then do we say, right, okay, now we're ready to start coming up with solutions. But the big difference here is that using the sort of tools I'm going to talk about today and we'll follow up with is that we don't necessarily just come up with like one big overarching, well, let's just try this one thing to solve this. We look at coming up with lots of different ideas. What are the different ways we could approach this? What are the different ideas we've got here? How might we, questions, how might we do X in order to facilitate Y? And we'll come up with lots of different ideas to test and learn. So it won't be a case of like just come up with one overarching solution. We'll come up with lots of different ideas and we'll take them out and we'll test them and learn from them. And when I say test and learn, it isn't the case that you have to come up with some beautifully kind of like thought out prototype. You can just sketch something out on a piece of paper and show it to someone and say, hey, we're thinking about trying this out. Would that work? What feedback have you got on that? Would that solve that problem for you? And then and only then, when we've got that experience of testing and learning, and we've learned from it, and we'll absolutely have some ideas that haven't worked and that have failed, then we're ready to sort of take those ideas and turn them into action and deliver. So that's kind of I guess, the overall framework. This is what a design sprint would look like. And depending on what you're working on, this can happen pretty quickly. Normally, well, sometimes even as quick as a day, usually a few days, maybe a week, depending on how complex it is. But within kind of a few days to a week, you've got what you need to go out and actually make a difference. And we've seen this really change the sort of success people teams have had in organizations by taking this approach. And like I said, there's a number of different tools that are sit underneath each of these different steps. And we'll talk about some of those. I've talked about some of them already. But very much more than that, it's about a mindset. It's about leaning into that curiosity, creativity, empathy. That is what really changes this up. Letting go of that expertise letting go of that need to be the expert in the room at all times. And going back to what I shared at the beginning in terms of the way the world of work is going and the rise of AI, it's these kind of skills that will really give you the value add and differentiate you from those individuals or teams within the people side of the business who carry on working in the way they've always worked, because they will absolutely find themselves being replaced by AI, is my opinion. That's where I think the world's going. But if we do this and we do this well, then we are absolutely creating a space for us to bring the human side of work, get a much better results. And you can already see, right, how AI can help you do some of this stuff. So when you've gathered lots of feedback, when you, for example, when you've done the testing and learning bit, you can use AI to help you analyze that, kick it around with AI and work in partnership with AI to help you analyze some of the outputs. So you can see how AI can help you with a lot of this stuff.
Thanks, Em. Can I just quickly jump in? We've got a question in the chat, and it feels like a nice time to ask it. Claudia's asked, how would you decide what people or employees should be in the design sprint with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I might put you on the spot there, Katie, because you do this all the time. You do a lot of this work with me. How would you answer that? It's really mean, isn't it?
No, it's not mean at all. No, I was already thinking about it, Emma.
I'm sure you were. I know you so well.
So really, you want to think about anybody that has I get there's two lenses really. There's people that are involved in the process itself. So let's go back to onboarding because it's a really great example because it does touch so many different parts of the organization. So you might want somebody there from the recruitment team. You might want somebody there from HR that get involved in that day one experience. You'd probably want a line manager or a couple of line managers that have recently brought someone into the team to talk about the experience for them. What role did they have to play? Because it's just as important for them to have a good experience during the onboarding process as it is for anybody else. And of course, you'd probably want to have some employees that had recently been through the process as well. If you go back to the sort of tools that Emma was mentioning, so journey mapping, the idea is for us to get a really good understanding of what sits behind the thing that you're trying to solve. So therefore, think about what people are involved in that process, either involved in setting it up and working the process or who have been affected by the process. I think that's probably it in a nutshell. Have I missed anything important there, Em?
Right. And that's a really good example, Katie, because where we've seen this really work is, let's take onboarding, is where we've had, for example, the facilities teams and the tech teams involved. Now, normally, so I mean, the point about so much of what we do in the people side of the business, it isn't kind of doesn't neatly sit in one area. It's often spans across so many different parts of the business. And it makes our kind of stakeholder management job pretty full on, right? Because we've got to, the same with onboarding, you go, well, okay, there's the bit that I'm responsible for, and I've got to speak to the legal team about the T's and C's side of things. And then the tech team about the app that we use or the tech we use. The facilities team is about like access and, all that sort of stuff. There are so many different people involved here. When you get them all in a room, it's amazing how quickly you just cut through all the noise straight away. And people go, well, yeah, I can do that. I can sort that. Oh, yeah. Well, here's how that works. And another part of the team, God, I didn't know that was the way we did that. And straight away, you're just kind of joining up these dots. So I think obviously you want people in the room who are impacted by the experience or have been impacted, and other people who have some role to play in that, and like I said, and line managers as well. So yeah.
I think just coming back to that point, Em, as well, is, we're talking about empathy here. A lot of the time, the people that are involved in the process aren't aware of the experience for the other people that are involved in the process. And not always, but often you get sort of blame. Something gets in the way, and it's like, well, this team hasn't done their part in it. But when you speak to that team, either there's a blocker ahead of them or they're not aware that what they're doing isn't getting through. So again, if you can get those people in the same room together, sometimes just getting other people to step inside each other's shoes, you know,
Mm.
they might be able to offer a solution with
Mm.
that they hadn't even thought about. So I think that's another really good reason for sort of getting the right people in the room as well, is just opening eyes a little bit and, like you say, connecting those dots.
Yeah. And we're working with a client on some of their sort of processes, disciplinary type process, and other processes as well. And again, we got in the room the kind of on the sort of more employment law side, legal side, and then real life employees and everyone in between. And what we realized is that, there were some boxes that had to be sort of ticked from an employment law point of view, but there wasn't necessarily a need to use that verbatim for what then ended up being communicated to employees. And just that kind of just getting the right people in the room to have that conversation. It's like, well, no, why have you assumed that? Well, I just always thought that was the way. And it just really kind of fast tracks all of that kind of, I guess, that misunderstanding that you get. And then why things often end up really convoluted or not working is because you kind of assume that, well, if the legal people say it needs to be in there, I better put it in. The legal people are saying, well, as long as there's a version of that somewhere, and employees can just tick a box and say, yeah, I've seen it. From a legal point of view, that's all we need to do. And actually, what we better is if we translated that into plain English, so people can actually understand what their responsibilities are and how this particular process or procedure impacts them. And they're just kind of this, I guess it just kind of cuts through that kind of misunderstanding. And there's assumptions that different teams and department have made, which meant that, often sort of, different processes end up being really kind of user friendly, shall we say. So, yeah. Okay. So this is about getting a practical way to get clear on the right problem to solve. Not the thing we think that needs solving, but the right problem. We've seen this so many times, haven't we, Katie? We kind of get in the room and straight away it's like, we thought we were solving problem X, it's actually problem Y. Design it with the people it actually impacts, testing before you scale it, and build capability, not just solutions. That's something else that we find is when we do this work, we often kind of do two things at the same time. So we build this design thinking capability with the people we're working with. So we work with like people teams, HR teams, internal comms teams, and kind of almost train them up to use these tools at the same time as working on something very real and very live. So you're doing two things at the same time, which works really well. So some of the tools I mentioned, so we've got things like journey maps, really simple way to kind of map a journey, and then you can do like a future version of this in terms of what's the experience like today, what could the experience be like in the future. That's quite an interesting one to do a little bit of a kind of a gap analysis there. We've got things like personas. If you can get real people in the room, great. If you can't, personas are great to use to help you stand in the shoes of the people you're designing for. I've talked about empathy maps. So, let's go back to that onboarding one. So, you've got someone new starting. What might they be thinking, feeling, seeing, hearing, doing? What are their pains and gains? Even better if you can get real life employees to answer that for themselves. So you're not making assumptions, but giving them a tool like that helps them to get their thoughts in order rather than just saying, what was the experience like? Oh, yeah, it was okay. If you say to people, well, tell me what you're thinking and feeling, what were you seeing and hearing, what were your pains and gains, you just get so much richer data and insights and just sort of saying, well, what was the onboarding experience like for you? You go, oh, yeah, it was okay, it was bad, but this is a great way to really drill down into the insights that you need. We've talked about ideation, prototyping, and testing quite a bit. So ideation is all about understanding where you're at in that kind of ideas process. At the beginning, it's all about lots and lots of different ideas. And then as you go through that journey, kind of getting clear on which ideas you want to take forward and why. And then the prototyping and testing piece is just going out and just doing some small scale tests to see how this would land. Would it solve the thing you need it to solve? So just some ideas around that. And we've got lots of stuff we can share with you on this and lots of more in-depth tools we can share with you as follow-up to kind of give you a bit of a flavour as to what this looks like. So when you define the problem properly, the solution changes, but so does the impact. And this has been the big game changer, I think, is understanding that so much of this really hangs off getting that problem definition right at the beginning. And we've got a couple of examples here, just checking time. I'll go through these really quickly because I want to make sure I've got time for questions. But I've used the onboarding example already, so I won't go through that one in too much detail. But let's just go on to the next one, which was this is a real life example from a client we worked with around employee recognition. The survey was saying employees weren't recognised, and the team in question went out and bought a recognition app or program. They're like, oh yeah, we've got this cool app, we'll just solve it with an app. And the problem was that few people loved it, but most people never used it. So we went in and we used the tools we're talking about here, and we got in a room with the right people, and we mapped the journey about what does good look like, or what is it like for you today in terms of recognition, and what does good look like. And what we realized was that actually an app was completely the wrong solution for most of their employees. They there was had quite a big blue collar part of their employee base, and for them, they didn't even have access to the app for starters, which is pretty obvious. But they hadn't thought about that, and also for a lot of their people, the idea of being employee of the month was their worst nightmare. It's like, God, please don't make me employee of the month. I couldn't think of anything worse. I don't want to be called out. All my colleagues will, take the mick out of me. I don't want that to happen. I want some real-time feedback from my manager. So lots of stuff came out there, but the minute we kind of used the tools we're talking about here, we realized very quickly that the app was not the right solution. That actually what it came down to was that people wanted to be recognized in very, very different ways. So by standing in the shoes that people were designing for, we understood much better what was going to work from them. And we kind of completely changed the whole way that recognition happened in that organization. Those are both very live, real examples. So the onboarding example and the recognition example. So testing of people changes everything. They get to co-create the ideas, test them in real contexts, and refine it before rolling out. So what happens is that when you do roll things out at scale, they are much more likely to work. And again, this stuff sounds really obvious, right? But we have seen, within the work that we do, the difference that this approach makes to organizations. It's not always easy. It can be hard to let go of assumptions. It's really hard to slow down before jumping to solutions. I always say kind of slow down to speed up. People go, yeah, but the solution's obvious. Like, well, you might think so at the moment, but you just got to kind of trust the process. I say it a lot. Trust the process. And I guarantee as people go through this, they trust the process by the end. They go, yeah, I completely get it now. Facilitating meaningful co-creation and turning ideas into something testable and maintain momentum after the sprint. So that's what really makes a difference in terms of design sprint approach. So tips for getting the formula right. Start with one real challenge, not everything. I say we have done kind of really complex big sprints, which are like, let's look at, say, the whole employee experience or the whole of the employee life cycle. But starting with something kind of much smaller and tangible and real, like onboarding or recognition, is a much cleaner, better way to do that. Getting the right people in the room we've mentioned about, focusing on understanding before we get into solving. Don't aim for perfection. It's not about getting this perfect. It's about just having some ideas to test and learn. So that kind of mindset piece is crucially important here, and creating a space for experimentation. So those are my kind of top tips for getting the formula right. And so just in terms of what we do in this space, this is something that we do every day with organizations. We've done more and more of it as the years have gone by. The last 2 years, a lot of our work is around this on complex real world challenges with cross-functional teams. And we don't just run sessions, we help you design solutions that actually work in practice at the same time, build your capability. So give you everything you need so you can do this long after you finish working with us. So if you think that you'd be interested in finding out more, get in touch. Happy to talk through the process in more detail, share some tools with you. We'll share some tools with you anyway as part of the follow-up. But yeah, give us a shout. We're always happy to have a chat. Even if it doesn't go anywhere, we're not about the hard sell that people are. We just love a conversation about this sort of stuff. I'm going to take a breath and shut up there. Would love to know if there are any questions coming through or anything you'd like to know a bit more about. Katie, over to you.
Thanks. We do have a question actually. Deanna has asked, is it best to do the empathy mapping piece in person, or would a pulse survey cover it?
So an empathy map is a qualitative way of gathering data, really. I think it works really well. Again, that human piece. When I say in person, it can be online, that works just as well. But you pick up on things when you see and hear people sharing their experiences, and you listening on those conversations, and you kind of just, as you get more curious with your approach and you get honed into this, you just pick up on things that you might not have picked up on if you did it via a kind of a survey. Now, ever the pragmatist as I am, if you haven't got time to do that, or you want to get a lot more data in, then you can do it via a survey. That's fine. But I would say if you do use some sort of quant to do that, I would say always run a few workshops as well, just to kind of back that up and just test what's coming out of the quant. Just see if that rings true when you do a qual dive on it as well. What would you say on that, Kate? You've got anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree. I think also, I think when you are doing it in person as well, you kind of hear a lot more when you're hearing people talk about how it makes them feel, and yeah, I find it's much richer, and gives you that extra bit of insight really, and you
Mm,
can delve into it as well
yeah,
when you've got that sort of more sort of qualitative data.
absolutely. Definitely.
We probably have time for one more question if anybody else wants to add a question into the chat. We've got lots of people sort of acknowledging their experiences. I think we've got a question might have just popped in. Shayla has asked, how do we choose which people to speak to for the empathy mapping?
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's just take that recognition experience actually, because that was a really interesting one, wasn't it? Because as we, and we go into this, every time we go into this, things are different. They're not always different each time, but you kind of go in, you think, yeah, I've done this a few times, well, many times before, know what we're doing. And the recognition experience one was actually one from quite a few years ago. It was about 5 years ago we did that one, wasn't it, Katie? But we hadn't thought about the people who were doing the nominating, had we? And very quickly, literally within about 5 minutes, we're like, oh, hang on a minute. We don't just need to think about people being recognized. We need to think about the people doing the recognizing. So that was a good example of like, I think with that one, we sort of looked at like frontline workers in different populations. So I'm just going to kind of paraphrase to make it easy here, but kind of your classic kind of head office type knowledge workers, and then your blue collar, they were kind of actually on a kind of production line type workers. So we wanted to look at those sorts of groups we were empathy mapping. And we also recognized there were kind of different levels as well. So we looked at kind of more frontline, then kind of more of your like your first line manager levels, and then more of your kind of like senior leadership levels. And then we realized we need to sort of think about the people who were also doing the nominating or the recognizing as well. So they were very different groups. So it wasn't just about people who were being recognized, about people who are actually having to recognize others as well. So either nominate people to be part of the recognition program, or think about how do I recognize the people that work for me or work with me. So there were quite different groups that came out there. So it depends on what you're looking at, but I think you sort of start with a kind of what feels like a sort of sensible approach, and as you go through the process, you'll kind of probably uncover more groups that you think you need to talk to. Go, oh, hadn't thought about them. They're a key part of this, so let's spend some time with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very similar answer to sort of thinking about who you might involved in the sprint itself in terms of how are they affected by the the actual experience that you're designing. And I think again, you mentioned earlier, Emma, personas as well. So it's if you have got personas in your organization, and if you haven't, talked to us because we can help you with that too. But if you do have employee personas, sort of looking at the sort of behavioral personas, that's another really good thing to feed into your empathy maps as well. So, for example, we've talked about onboarding, we've talked about recognition. If you're looking at, say, a campaign that affects the entire organization, outside of that experience, if that makes sense, using something like your personas to kind of sense check, how does this feel for these different groups of people? We haven't necessarily got them all in the room, or maybe you're unable to get them all in the room. Maybe as a people team, you haven't got the access to all of those people. Using something like personas as well is a really great way to feed into your empathy maps. And again, speak to us and we can absolutely show you and talk through how we would do something like that.
Mm. I think that's a really good point as well. Sometimes we work with companies who are like, but we need to make sure we catch everybody. And again, it's like it's not going to happen. If you're a big complex organization, it's about, where are the key populations we need to speak to? And it might not be about numbers. It might be there's a really small population that are critical to the experience that you need to get to. So it isn't necessarily about the big numbers, but you need to, again, I love the word pragmatic. You be pragmatic about this and say, how do we make best use of our time and make something happen, make some change happen. But we don't need to have this perfect. We don't need to make sure we spend to every single person in the organization or had every single group ticked off, and that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Another of our friends, Rosie, has popped in the chat. A reminder that she worked with us on using a design sprint, and she's saying
It
it.
is. Hi, Rosie.
Yeah, lovely to see you on here, Rosie. That it really does work, but there's something you also need to consider is, with some of these types of experiences, you might be working across silos as well. So again, got to really take a pragmatic approach. There will be things that maybe you won't necessarily have that ownership over outside of what you discover. And it might be that, again, you've got this evidence that you can use to maybe influence some of those other groups of people that might be more involved in different aspects of that process. Hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm just conscious of time. It's 4 o'clock, so I'm sure lots of you are kind of jumping off now, but I would love you to go away and start to have a go with these tools and techniques and ideas. And if you just do one bit, just map a journey or have a go at some empathy mapping. You don't have to do the whole thing. Tell us how you get on. We want to hear from you. We're really happy to kind of share thoughts and ideas and give you some feedback. So just start having a go at it and see how you get on. But thank you everybody. I'm loving all the emojis coming through. It's wonderful. It makes me feel what a nice little lift on a Tuesday after it's Tuesday, a Tuesday afternoon. And thank you everybody for showing up today. Really appreciate it. We'll
Yeah.
be in touch with some follow-up materials and resources and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world and have a go with the tools and let us know how you get on. We can't wait to hear from you.
Thanks so much,
Take
everybody.
care.
Take care.
Bye.